He made him who knew no sin to be sin on our behalf, so that we might become the righteousness of God in him. Of course, he refers to God, and him refers to Christ. So God made Jesus, who knew no sin, to be sin on our behalf. This is a very, very important statement. And it's also sort of a very dangerous statement. I mean, what does it mean? It says that Jesus knew no sin, but he was made to be sin. Now, first of all, let's look at the fact that Jesus knew no sin. To me, this is one of the most amazing things about the man Jesus of Nazareth. He was without sin, morally perfect. Now, to give you an idea of how extraordinary that is, what is the greatest commandment? That we should love the Lord our God. We may be able to say that the greatest sin is not to obey that commandment, to not love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. Now, I want you to think about something. There has never been one moment in our lives, not one moment in our lives have we loved God as God deserves. Even the most pious, devoted Christian has never loved God as God deserves. But let's look at Jesus. Every moment he loved God as God ought to be loved. He not only obeyed God with regard to his deeds, but with his innermost thoughts. I sometimes wonder how horrible it must have been for him to even walk among us. Imagine walking yourself among a bunch of filthy, vile murderers, immoral people, thieves and robbers, sexually perverted people. But we are closer to them than Jesus is to us. Jesus knew nothing of sin. Now think about this. There has never been one deed that we have done that we did it entirely for the glory of God. He did everything he ever did perfectly and totally for the glory of God. That's amazing. We could spend our entire life just thinking about Christ's sinless perfection, and it would not be a wasted life. He was without sin, and yet he was made sin on our behalf. Now, what does it mean? Does it mean that when Jesus was on the cross, that his nature became corrupted, or that he himself became depraved? No. He was always the Lamb, the spotless Lamb, always. Well, then what does it mean that he was made sin? So that we might become the righteousness of God in him. Now remember what we learned about justification. The moment you believed in Jesus, you were justified. This does not mean that the moment you believed, you became a perfectly righteous being, because you still sin, and so do I. Then what does it mean? It means that when we believe in Jesus, God declares us to be legally right with him, and he treats us that way. Now, if he considered us what we were, and if he treated us according to what we are, we'd be in hell. But when we believe in Jesus, he declares us to be legally right with him, and he treats us that way. And now we can say the same thing or a similar thing about Christ on the cross. He bore our sin, and the Father declared him to be guilty. Our sins were put on him, and legally before the throne of God, he was declared guilty, and he was treated that way. We are not righteous, but we were legally declared to be righteous, and were treated that way. Christ was not guilty, but he bore our sin, and he was legally declared to be guilty, and God treated him that way. God crushed him under the full force of his wrath, the wrath that should have been yours. I want us just to think about this perfect man, and then in one moment he is bearing the sins of the world, the sins of all his people. The Son of God existed in a perfect relationship in the Trinity throughout all of eternity. The Father rejoiced in his Son. The Son rejoiced in the Father, constantly gazing at one another. Perfect joy and harmony. And then Christ goes to a cross, and he bears the filth of his people. All the anger of God, all the justice of God is thrown down upon the head of his Son. This had to happen in order to save you. You see, when we learn these things, it causes us to love Christ. It causes us to want to serve Him. Everyone who disobeyed the law is under a curse. You and I were under a curse. And that's all there is to it. What does it mean to be under a curse? It means that because of our sin, we were objects of God's disfavor. We were objects who deserve His wrath. Objects that should be cast out. Not only in the eyes of God were we unholy, but in the eyes of all the holy creatures of heaven. The sinner is so vile and so disgusting, not only before a holy God, but before all the holy inhabitants of heaven, that the last thing the sinner will hear when he takes his first step into hell is all of creation standing to its feet and praising God because God has rid the earth of him. That's what we deserve. I know this is very sad, but only in this darkness can we truly understand how beautiful what Christ did for us is. Christ redeemed us from the curse of the law, having become a curse for us, for it is written, "Cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree." We were objects of God's displeasure. Christ took our place. He became a curse. Look what He did. He carried your sin. He was declared guilty. He was cursed of God. You and I should be cursed of God. But our sin was thrown on Christ, and Christ suffered the curse. In order to understand what it was like for Christ to suffer the curse, we'll take the Beatitudes and turn them around and apply them to Christ on the cross in a negative manner. Now just listen. According to this text, the blessed are granted the kingdom of heaven, but the cursed are refused entrance. You have been given the kingdom of heaven. Why? Because when Christ was on the cross, He cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And heaven's door was slammed. The blessed are recipients of divine comfort because Christ suffered as an object of divine wrath. The blessed are satisfied. You and I are satisfied because Christ suffered misery. It says the blessed receive mercy because Christ was condemned on the cross without pity. The blessed shall see God because Christ was cut off from His presence. The blessed are sons and daughters of God because Christ bore our disgrace.